join me in welcoming for the sixth time, Ani Basu.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? It's a privilege to be with you again, the crew. This crowd becomes more gender mixed with the year, I notice. With the years, more men in this audience than ever. I don't see Caitlyn Jenner here, but my presentation today is entitled The Pit and the Pendulum. The theme of my presentation is war. Though the outlook is not horrible, certainly not for the Tampa metropolitan area, and I'll certainly drill deep into Tampa area data. But that is the unifying theme of my presentation of horror, and it's important to remember that all horror stories start out quite well. Often the story of a young girl who buys a lovely doll, albeit secondhand, who nurtures that doll tenderly until it murders her. The story of a troop of young people who decide to visit the catacombs of Paris or Chernobyl, and how could that end badly? But for now, the data are pretty upbeat. The Pit and the Pendulum, a short story written by Edgar Allan Poe, first published in 1842. As in previous years, I'll start very broadly, first with a primer on the global economy. I'll quickly taper down into national level economic data. I'll then give you data specific to Florida and Tampa, data specific to real estate and construction. I'll conclude with a forecast for the balance of 2015. I'll talk about energy markets, financial markets, all manner of markets. But let me first get into that broader discussion of the global economy. And despite all the bad news that we hear about from various parts of the world, the fact of the matter is the global economy continues to manifest forward momentum. Not a ton of forward momentum, but nonetheless forward momentum. Last year, according to the World Bank, the global economy expanded 2.6% in real, meaning inflation-adjusted terms. The forecast for the current year, 3.0%. Of course, there's more forward momentum in certain parts of the world than others. You might ask the question, Anirban, what was the fast-growing economy in 2014, last year? In fact, this chart shows you a listing of the 20 fastest and 20 slowest-growing economies from last year. Some of you may not be able to see the text here, so I'll walk through this a little bit. These data come from the International Monetary Fund. And again, these are estimates of growth for last year. The left-hand columns are populated by the fastest-growing economies in the world from 2014. The right-hand columns the slowest-growing economies from 2014. What was the fastest-growing economy in the world last year? Well, a two-way tie between Turkmenistan and Ethiopia. The Ethiopians, is an agricultural story for them. Oilseed, flowers, coffee plantations, other agricultural output. You might ask the question, Anirban, but how did the Turkmen do it? Is this not just a nation of 5.2 million people? Capital Ashgabat, currency of the manat, 24.6 years, the average age of women at first childbirth. But you're saying, Anirban, we know all that. Why did they manage to grow 10.3% last year? Is this not just an agrarian society supported by ancient modes of irrigation? It is, but they also have hefty oil and natural gas reserves. And you should not allow the fact that oil prices today are around $61 a barrel persuade you into thinking that the demand for productive inputs is declining. In fact, that's not true. The world today is home to roughly 7.2 billion people. By the year 2050, that number is around 9.3 to 9.5 billion people. India by itself will have 1.6 to 1.7 billion people. In fact, the demand for productive inputs is rising with each and every passing day. And because the world has recognized that rising demand for inputs, has invested a lot of money to create or build or bring those inputs to market. And so there are times during which supply can outstrip demand growth, and so prices fall. But you'll notice that many of the countries in the left-hand column are natural resource-oriented. Uzbekistan, for instance, Tanzania, a major producer of bauxite and input into aluminum. The same can be said of Mozambique at number 9, another major producer of bauxite. But natural resources has a lot to do with that left-hand column. It's not always about that. At number 16, tied with Cambodia, is St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. That's about rich people hiding their money. So Switzerland is no longer as safe for people who are trying to hide money as it used to be. And so money is moving around, and St. Kitts and Nevis is one of the beneficiaries. In the right-hand column, also a unifying theme. If the left-hand columns are largely about natural resources, the right-hand column is about something else. And let's see if you can see this theme, this connective tissue here. Maybe you can't see it, but it's Europe, 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 Europe. You see how subtle that is? And no surprise, when the Europeans are struggling economically, There's only so rapidly the global economy can expand. The Europeans have or possess the largest economy on the planet. And so, as I say, the global economy can only manage around 3% growth. In a typical year, the global economy manages to grow closer to 4%. You notice that the United States is in neither column here. The United States is reflected on this chart. Now, these data also come from the International Monetary Fund, however. These data are forward-looking, whereas the previous chart looked at 2014, this looks at 2015. So I won't go through all of this, too much data on here by half, but you'll notice the outlook for Europe is improving as it turns out. It's still not fabulous. The euro area only expected to grow 1.5%. The Germans a bit better than that. The French 1.2%. The Italians less than 1%. The Canadians, for their part, expect to grow 2.2% this year, but of course nobody cares. And then the outlook for America, it might surprise you, 3.1%. That's pretty good. And if we manage to grow 3% or better this year, this would represent the first year since 2005 that the American people had accomplished that. It used to be the case, as we all know, that 3% was no big deal. During the 25 years that preceded the Great Recession, this nation averaged 3.25% growth per annum. As I said, we haven't done 3% or better in 10 years. Last year, 2005, when we grew 3.4%. But one of the notions coming into the year, at least, had been that the U.S. economy was ready to really take off. And I'll talk about why that hasn't happened yet and what the ultimate outlook is for this nation's economy. The bottom part of the slide is focused on the emerging countries of the world. So you'll know some interesting stories here. China's growth rate is expected to be the slowest in 20 years, less than 7%. India, by contrast, with the growth expectation now of 7.5%, a multi-year high. The Brazilian economy expected to shrink this year, and the Russian economy expected to shrink even more this year. And of course, they deserve that. Now let's take a step back here. Where are we in this current economic recovery cycle? Now it's June, and so this month we will complete 6 full years of economic expansion. Meaning that this month we'll begin our 7th year of economic recovery. That means that this current economic expansion is already lengthier than the typical post-World War II recovery, which is around 4.5 to 5 years on average. Despite that, you'll find many people who believe the recovery has not even begun, that we're still in recession. A recent survey by NBC News, of course, they have no credibility as they gave us Brian Williams, but that survey indicates that 57% of Americans still think we're in recession. Other news agencies who have conducted surveys, data conducted surveys around 50%. Those proportions have been falling over time, of course, but are still quite high. And one of the reasons for that is the economic recovery today has been very much unevenly shared. If you look at what's really come back since the financial crisis took full hold of this economy and commercial real estate in 2008, what's really come back is corporate profits and stock prices. So today we're sitting at a Dow Jones of around 18,000, an S&P 500 around 2,100, a NASDAQ is still above 5,000. These are near multi-year highs, and sometimes, in some cases, near all-time highs. So what's really come back? Corporate profits and stock prices. Corporations have been incredibly profitable on average. I'll give you a statistic from 2013. We don't have the same data yet for 2014. But in 2013, corporate profits as a share of GDP in our country equaled 10%. That was an all-time record. The previous record had been achieved in 2012, and before that, 1929. It is rare for corporate America to be this profitable. But what has not recovered robustly, you can see it here, home prices are now still not back to their pre-recession peak in much of the U.S. Number of jobs ordered by the U.S. economy is still roughly equivalent to the number of jobs ordered in late 2007 during the eve of the recession. And income growth in real terms has been quite sluggish. That doesn't mean we're in recession, clearly not. As I say, this month we begin the 7th year of economic recovery, but the gains have been unequally shared. Look, for instance, at household income share. So we have a sum total of household income in our country. For which families? Divide that household income share into top percents, next percent, so on and so forth. For whom has household income share increased in recent years? The top 3% of American families. Stayed flat to the next 7% of American families, fallen to the bottom 90% of American families. So the gains have been unevenly shared, and it's important to remember, in terms of our attitudes toward the economy, it's not just about absolute progress or lack thereof. It's also relative. So I'm from Baltimore. So to whom do I compare myself? Of course, Joe Flacco. He's our quarterback. We all do. Now, he makes $120.6 million over 6 years. And it's not the $120 million that bothers me, it's the 0.6. Because that 0.6 is $600,000, and I'm like, Joe, did you have to negotiate that hard? But the point is, a lot of people feel that they're being left behind. Now, that said, once you've completed 6 years of economic expansion, you do see some manifestations of progress, even for the middle class. Here I show you average hourly earnings for construction workers. Now, the construction worker unemployment rate in this country is 7.5%, still quite high. But who are these 7.5%? What skills do they have? Where do they live? If they live in markets in which construction demand is not rising particularly rapidly, there's a mismatch there. Could also be a skills mismatch, of course. And so even with that high rate of unemployment, we are starting to see some construction worker inflation. The numbers on the vertical axis I'd ask you to ignore. Those numbers are in 1982, $84. It's simply the way the index comes to us from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But we are starting to see those threshold effects, and this is one of the things that could make projects more expensive as people are racing to find construction workers. And in Tampa and St. Petersburg and Clearwater, where development momentum is really building quite rapidly, this becomes more of a consideration. Another way of looking at the fact of recovery is through this lens, the lens of this map. The map that's updated every month by moody'seconomy.com. So, the data that powered this map runs through March of 2015. The states in red are in recession, well, no states in recession. States in tan are at risk of recession, no states at risk of recession. Everyone has forward momentum, including Florida. 2 colors on the map, blue and green. My state of Maryland, your state of Florida in blue. What does this mean? These states are still recovering. They're in recovery. And what does that mean? These states have not fully recovered from the Great Recession. The long key dimensions like unemployment rates, home prices, these states are not actually back to where they had been pre-recession. The states in green, by contrast, are more than fully back. And at the vanguard of U.S. economic growth in recent years, North Dakota. And why is that? That, of course, is the Bakken Shale Formation is oil production. Not every community in the country, of course, produces oil. It still manages to be a national economic story. In 2012, we produced 6.5 million barrels of oil per day as a people. 1 year later, 7.5. Last year, 8.7 million barrels of oil per day. This year, actually last month, the average was 9.6 million barrels, despite the decline in oil prices. Remarkable. You see the advertisements indicating that we'll soon be the #1 producer of oil in the world, or number 1 in natural gas. Now, as I said, not all of the states produce oil and natural gas, but you'll notice that many of the states in green that are expanding, that are more than fully recovered, are in the natural resource belt of the country. Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Utah, Colorado. I don't know how you conceive of Colorado, but it's a really natural resource intensive state. In 2013, they were #1 in marijuana, #6 in natural gas, #9 in oil production. When those two were not completely baked, they produced 63.2 million barrels of oil that year. That was an all-time record for Colorado. And by the way, it's one of the reasons, I think, because the Colorado economy has not fallen apart, that more communities are looking to at least decriminalize marijuana, because their economy is still performing well, and they're just mellower. Another way of looking at this is through this map. So, all things being equal, when the economy improves, state tax collection should improve. Some states, of course, have income taxes, some states do not. Some states have retail sales tax, including this one, some states do not. But in general, there's more transactions during periods of economic expansion, and there's therefore more taxable events. Here, the states in blue are states that are more than fully recovered in terms of tax collections vis-a-vis the pre-recession period. So, one state that's recovered is North Dakota, no surprise. Again, Bakken Shale Formation in 2012, that state surpassed Alaska in terms of aggregate oil production, really remarkable. And that generates a lot of tax revenues for Bismarck. Other states that have recovered in terms of tax revenues, again, states in blue, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland. Now, these states, by and large, however, did not recover in terms of tax revenues because these states have been really strong growers. These states recovered because they raised tax rates in those states. So what do each of these 3 states now have in common? Republican governors. So in Illinois, Pat Quinn lost his re-election bid to Governor Rauner. In Massachusetts, the Republican governor is Charlie Baker, and in my state of Maryland, it's Republican Larry Hogan, who defeated the Democratic 8-year lieutenant governor and odds-on favorite to win that election, Anthony Brown. Why do I bring this up? Certainly not to be partisan. I think we got from the previous panel that we don't want to be partisan. But we had 36 gubernatorial elections in November. 24 won by Republicans, and my very strong feeling is, and you may disagree with me badly on this, that the taxpayers spoke and said, we don't want to see tax increases at the state level. Now, on the one hand, you say, okay, we understand that. More and more of the electorate is moving towards fixed income and retirement. But ask yourself the question, who's going to pay for infrastructure? The conventional wisdom has been, with the federal government amassing an $18 trillion national debt and facing between $60 and $129 trillion in future unfunded Social Security and Medicare liabilities, that by necessity, funding of infrastructure would have to devolve to the states. Not because that's optimal, by the way. The federal government is trying to connect markets together. I mean, they have an interest in connecting Tampa with Miami or Tampa with Los Angeles. Whereas if it's financed by a state, the focus is on Tallahassee and Gainesville, whatever it happens to be. It's more local in orientation. But by necessity, because that's where the money is, the problem is that's not where the money is. There's no money anywhere. Not necessarily at the federal level, state, or local level. So if the taxpayer is saying, no, we're just not interested, in my own state where Larry Hogan won, probably the biggest upset of that night in terms of electorally, no one expected Larry Hogan to even come close to Anthony Brown. He's already lowered tolls. Now he's a dear friend of mine, but and he said to the state's taxpayers, I'm going to give you relief. He's lowered the tolls, that's fine. The Bay Bridge and so on and so forth, fine. But that leaves less money for infrastructure. Where does money come from? Now, why would this audience care? We're not interested not in infrastructure, we're interested in commercial real estate. But of course, you have to be interested in infrastructure. Because infrastructure drives a lot of commercial real estate. In my state, we have a couple of big mass transit projects on various capital programs. They have not been funded yet. But we have the Purple Line, which connects Montgomery County or Will and Prince George's County, two of our two most populous counties. And if you look at the proposed Purple Line, who's bought all the land adjacent to this line, this proposed line? It's not even built yet. Hasn't even started construction yet. Developers. Infrastructure development leads to residential and commercial development. But where does the infrastructure dollars come from now? The obvious answer, of course, is public-private partnerships. If we could just get that private capital to participate in infrastructure markets, we don't have an issue. But those deals are really hard to put together. Really hard. And policymakers actually are often scared of, entering into a 75-year or 99-year lease, of course, because they're tying the hands of all future governors, mayors, the parish chieftains, whatever it happens to be. So that's one consideration. Now, I want to stick with the positive news here. Industrial production in this country has been surging. So energy production has been surging. Industrial production has been surging. And you can see all of this in gross domestic product. We're expanding economically. We're not in recession. Now, again, there's not a lot of enthusiasm about the U.S. economy. Despite this 6 years of economic expansion, not a lot of enthusiasm. And one of the reasons for that, the recovery has just not been that robust. It's been a 2% recovery. 2010 was the first calendar year of economic expansion post-recession. That year, the U.S. economy expanded 2.5%. Next year, 1.6%. The year after that, 2.3%. The year after that, 2.2%. Last year, 2.4%. 2% recovery. And how do you get to 2% year after year after year? Well, it's very simple. It's really simple. Good quarter, bad quarter, good quarter, bad quarter, good quarter, bad quarter. A lot of sustained momentum. Now, last year, we started to generate some sustained momentum in the economy. I point you, for instance, to the second quarter of 2014, right there. In the second quarter of 2014, the U.S. economy expanded 4.6% in annualized terms. So, that's not bad. That's not bad. That's quite good, in fact. But it was just one quarter, and we had previous quarters earlier in the cycle during which we had expanded roughly that rapidly, only to be disappointed with the next quarter. So the question became one of sustained momentum. Now, I went to India for the holidays at the request of my wife to visit my in-laws. So that was no holiday, and that was no request. So I cheerfully left these shores on December 18th of 2014. At that time, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, which supplies us with our GDP estimates, was indicating that we grew 3.5% during the third quarter of last year. So that's not bad. 4.6%, 3.5%. But upon my joyful return to these shores on January 5th of 2015, but who's counting? I learned that the BEA had provided upward estimates for estimate to 5.0%. So now we have 4.6%, 5.2%. Now the economy seems like has real momentum. But we've had a lot of head fakes in this economic expansion cycle. A lot of periods in which we thought the U.S. economy was ready to take off, only to disappoint us. And sure enough, fourth quarter, 2.2%. Now, it is, or should be said, that the fourth quarter was very much impacted by the West Coast port slowdown. Shaved more than a full percentage point of GDP growth during that quarter, was incredibly undercovered by the media. It's a major economic event. The media almost didn't pick it up at all. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I know what it's like when the media fixates on an issue and won't go away. But if you focus on some, you might miss others, and they missed it. Anything that shaves more than a full percentage point on GDP for a 3-month period demands front-page attention. Media didn't get it. In fact, there was a photograph of Kim Kardashian that came out during that quarter, you might remember it, that attracted more media attention than the West Coast port slowdown, despite the fact that only shaved 0.5% from GDP because of lost productivity. In any case, even with that fourth quarter, that was the best 9-month period of the economic expansion so far. So the feeling was, okay, now the West Coast port slowdown is over. U.S. economy has this momentum. 2015 is the year. IMF forecast 3.1%. What do we get through the first quarter? Negative 0.7%. For a second consecutive year, the U.S. economy actually shrinks for the first 2 months of the year. A lot of factors. Of course, winter was long and brutal. We had ice storms as far south as Atlanta, maybe even south of that, but the Georgians can only handle ice in a glass. And sometimes not even then. It was tough. We had the lingering effects of the West Coast port slowdown and some other factors. Now, I think it was said that this is my 6th or 7th year speaking at this event, and I've liked every year. And I would like to be invited back, but I'll probably do something now that means that I'll never be invited back to speak to you again. I'm going to break down GDP into its constituent components. You all remember from school the equation y equals c plus I plus g plus e minus m? So that's all I'm showing you here after lunch, and you are welcome. So this is called the National Income Identity Equation. Identity, because the notion is that output, and we produce around $17 trillion in output as a people each year, as a nation, equals the uses of output. That you do not provide your services or your products simply for the sake of providing them. You do that because somebody benefits from that provision. And of course, will compensate you for that provision. So output equals the uses of output. So Y is the way that we abbreviate output. We measure in terms of gross domestic product, and there's other alternative measures of output. But the abbreviation is Y. Y equals the uses of output, and there's various categories of users. First category, C, first consumption, the first set of bars here. That's consumer spending. That's household spending. So Y equals C plus I. What's I? Gross investment, the last set of bars here. That's purchase of software by businesses, equipment, private construction shows up in that category, inventories. Plus G, what's G? Government spending, the second set of bars here. That's public agency spending at every level of government, from federal to municipal. Plus E, what's E? Exports, what's produced in this great country, what's sold abroad. Minus M, imports, what's produced abroad, what's sold in this great country. E minus M in parentheses is net exports, the third set of bars here. Y equals C plus I plus G plus E minus M, simple. Now, how does this work? If you just look at the green colored bars here, just the green colored bars. So the green colored bars signify the first quarter of 2015, the last quarter for which we have data, and you were to add the numbers attached to those bars, if you can see them, you would get that negative 0.7%. So all I'm doing through some decomposing growth, and now this slide becomes very easy to interpret. What has been the most significant and sustained source of growth in America is growth in personal consumption. This is a consumer-led recovery, that's all that says. It's not a government spending-led recovery. No surprise, sequestration began March 1st of 2013. It's not a net export-led recovery. No surprise. Global economy is weak, halting, erratic. Difficult for exports to grow exports under those circumstances. Moreover, as you know, the U.S. dollar has gotten stronger. So as I stand here, the euro can only buy $1.11. It wasn't long ago that one euro could buy $1.38. As I stand here, one U.S. dollar will buy 124 Japanese yen. Wasn't long ago that $1 could only buy 100 Japanese yen. Today, one Canadian dollar will buy 80 cents U.S. Wasn't long ago that one Canadian dollar is actually worth more than one U.S. dollar. And so this has made it more difficult for exporters to grow exports. And then gross investment. We've had some big quarters, but a lot of those big quarters are inventory accumulation. the second quarter of 2014 as retailers got ready to sell to consumers for the most part. This reinforces the notion this is a consumer-led recovery. What does a consumer need to keep driving this forward? They need a job. Now, during the worst of the recession, of course, when you went to various job sites, what did you notice? Fewer bodies. Compared to the previous month, quarter, or a year, the bodies were being snatched. But the pendulum has swung away from that pit, the Great Recession, and we're now adding jobs at a fairly rapid clip. Take April as an example, 223,000 more jobs added by the U.S. economy. We've added 2.982 million jobs over the past year. This is the breakdown by industry of those jobs, April 2014, April 2015. Number one sector adding jobs, professional business services, they sit in office buildings. Number two is education health services, but that's dominated by health services. They sit in pharmacies, they actually sit at home too. Home health is part of that category. Retail, trade, wholesale, trade, transportation, utilities. That's distribution centers, retail space, maybe commercial space, fulfillment centers. Leisure and hospitality, that's hotels and restaurants. And you do not need an economist to come down from Baltimore to tell you that we're adding jobs to leisure and hospitality. It's the nature of a consumer-led recovery. Hotel occupancy is up. Why? Because Americans are traveling. Restaurants are busier. Why? Because Americans are eating out more and more. I'll show you more data on that in a moment. And you can see it. I mean, sir, go tonight to an Applebee's. Now, don't eat there. You're better than that. But go there from the perspective of doing some primary research. You'll be busy, as will the Olive Garden next door, the Steaks of the Street. The Chipotle's will be slammed, I can assure you. I even saw someone last week go into a Red Lobster. So the consumer should be engaged. Moreover, one of the other complaints about the recovery has been, going back to the previous slide, yeah, we've been adding jobs for many years, but these are low-quality jobs that we're adding. One could reasonably make such a statement until roughly last year. Because last year we started adding more jobs in construction, manufacturing, financial activities, and in local government, which is encompassed by that government category. A lot of those are middle-income jobs. Now, Florida, and by the way, it says non-farm because that's the way the data comes from the federal government. Florida is, one could say, booming. 277,700 jobs added over the past year, for which we have data, April 2014, April 2015, 3.6% of job totals. Florida is coming back in a big way. Number one sector added jobs, leisure and hospitality. That's, again, hotels and restaurants. A lot of people are visiting here. Local consumers are also spending, eating out, so on and so forth. You can see construction up by 32,200 jobs. Tampa Metro, this is the 18th largest metropolitan area in the country with a population of around 3 million. Population growth here since 2010 has been roughly 50% faster than the balance of the country. This place now is a buzz. And though this unity is not good, this similarity, one could argue, is a good thing. For this reason, to be able to offer Tampa and St. Petersburg and Clearwater is a wonderful thing because people can tailor their Tampa metropolitan experience to them. Whether they're a young knowledge worker, a retiree, or an industrialist, whoever they happen to be, there's a market here that fits their needs, their profile, so on and so forth. That might help explain why all the communities are flourishing here. Number one sector adding jobs here, region that's adding 39,100 jobs, leisure and hospitality. Here's Orlando. Orlando, 47,200 jobs, 4.3% job totals. Job growth in Orlando roughly twice as rapid as the balance of the country. And then Miami. Miami is a region of around 6 million people, 8th largest metropolitan area in the country. 82,800 jobs over the past year, 3.4% of job total. But wherever you look in Florida, people are coming here, moving here, starting businesses, creating jobs. It's a lot different from when I first started speaking at Crew, by the way. At that time, it was pretty depressing around here. There wasn't a lot of buzz around Tampa or St. Petersburg or Clearwater. There were a lot of people who were out of jobs. There were property values that were shrinking. There was a foreclosure crisis. Boy, things changed. Things changed. By the way, I thought they would, and I had predicted as much. I mean, I had said to people back in 08, 09, do yourselves a favor, and this was true. Wherever I spoke across the country, do yourselves a favor, buy some real estate in Florida. And to drive one point, I had said to them that it is as American as baseball, apple pie, mom, and Toyota. To eventually retire to Florida. Do it. Now, back then the Dow was around 8,000, 9,000, actually fell below 7,000 for a time. Today, as I say, around 18,000. I said, you show me Dow 16,000 back then. I'll show you a ton of retiring baby boomers. Well, as I say, Dow 18,000, they're coming. And, I think you'll agree, as commercial real estate professionals, it's a pretty cyclical industry. And the pendulum can swing in both directions. And when there's this much money available, ultimately that can translate into overbuilding, excessively low cap rates, and so on and so forth. And it may translate into that at some point in the future, no question about that. I mean, you enjoy the good times while they last. But a permanent aspect of this growing prosperity is the fact that America is home to so many retiring baby boomers. It's a massive generation. That is something that is structurally semi-permanent, something to watch for in the years ahead. Here's national construction employment, national construction. Another 45,000 jobs added in April, 280,000 jobs over the past year. We support now in this country 4.6% more construction workers than we did just 1 year ago. No surprise that construction wages are starting to rise. This is state-by-state growth in construction jobs. California number 1, Florida number 2. 32,200 jobs, a number I quoted earlier. This is employment growth, overall employment growth by percentage terms across 50 U.S. states. Number 1 is Utah, 4% job growth. By the way, I did a presentation recently to a group of cardiothoracic surgeons at Memorial Hospital in Baltimore. It was a group of surgeons from all over the world. It happened to be at that particular hospital. And a gentleman in the front, an American physician, asked me the question, why do you economists focus so much on growth? Why focus so much on growth? And actually, it's not a question I've ever asked myself, because I just presume that it's a good thing. Growth is a good thing. And I think as commercial real estate professionals, you pretty much presume it too. But I thought about it for a second. I said, why is important growth? It's how we expand the economic pie. In the absence of growth, the only way to raise up the living standards of the worst off in the community is through redistribution. There's no other way. But growth, at least theoretically, is a rising tide that can lift all boats. And in terms of jobs availability, which state added more jobs in percentage terms than any other? It was Utah. And that's technology, it's tourism, a variety of sectors, natural resources. Number 2 is Florida. Florida, as you know, last year surpassed New York State to become the 3rd most populous state in the country, and it's 2nd in terms of percentage job growth. Is really quite impressive. Notice also states that suffered mightily during the downturn. States like Nevada, Georgia, California, and Arizona at number 15, all are in this first column. All are now among the fastest growers in terms of the economy. These are 5 of the states that were hit the hardest. Some markets are more susceptible to major swings in economic performance. Florida is certainly one of them. Why? Because during good economic times, global capital comes here in large amounts. Global capital is not that fixated on Baltimore, I gotta tell you. But when times are good, capital just flies into this state, and so that generates a lot of activity. And then when times are tough globally, what happens? That capital disappears. So these states often go through these kinds of cycles, but right now you can see the performance is very impressive. This unemployment rate for the 50 states, Florida there at number 31, 5.6%. People are getting back to work. Nebraska has the lowest rate of unemployment in the country, 2.5%, and that of course is because no one wants to live there. Now, this is data from metropolitan areas. These are the 20 largest metropolitan areas in the country. Dallas is a region of 6.7 million people, and it is tied with Minneapolis for the lowest rate of unemployment. No one talks about Minneapolis, by the way. Region of 3 million people. No one ever talks about Minneapolis because their sports teams are so bad. So the Twins, the Vikings, the Timberwolves, the Golden Gophers are all uniformly horrific in the arenas and on the fields. These are some of the most uncoordinated people in our country. But they've driven us to great businesses and Best Buy, Target, 3M, so on and so forth. You can see technology markets like Houston, San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, Washington, sort of rounding out that top 7. Tampa right there at number 10. Again, this region of roughly 3 million people, 5.3%. Tampa now has an unemployment rate below the national average. In none of my speeches I've delivered to you before, for crew, have I been able to say that Tampa Metro has a lower unemployment rate than the nation until this year. You can see Miami there at 5.5%. Now, let me talk about the data which you might have most interest, real estate and construction. And I'll start off this part of the story, residential, and then move to non-residential. I'm hitting the home stretch, I promise. Now, I gave a speech recently in Annapolis, Maryland, to a group of realtors. If you go to Annapolis, Maryland, you will find the headquarters of the Maryland Association of Realtors. And I said to them, look, we economists cannot do anything more on your behalf. We've given you a resurging stock market. We've given you nearly 3 million jobs over the past year. We've given you an unemployment rate nationally now neatly below 6%, and we've given you cheap money. 30-year fixed mortgage rate less than 4%, 15-year fixed mortgage rate of around 3%. We cannot do anything more on your behalf. It's now time for you to get busy and peddle other people's wares. And you would think with all these factors in place, my goodness, owner-occupied housing must be booming in America. High asset prices, pretty good job growth, higher quality jobs being added, and cheap money, my goodness. But that's not where you see the boom. This is U.S. new home sales. There's no boom there. People ask me the question sometimes, Anibar, why do you economists focus so much on where new home sales are today versus the bubble in 2005? Why make that comparison? I'm not. If you look here, you'll see that new home sales in April of 2015 were well below what they were in January of 1999, pre-millennium, pre-boom. We're not even close. You can really see this in housing starts. The blue shade area here is single-family housing starts. It's flat. The gold is multifamily. That's mostly apartments. That's where the boom is. You really see it in this chart, by the way, home ownership. Back in the second quarter of 2007, home ownership in America was 69.2%. We just got data for the first quarter, 63.8%. And from the perspective of home ownership, it's as if the 90s and 2000s never occurred. We're back to home ownership rates of the 1980s and before the 1960s. Now, home ownership in this country fell in the 1970s. No surprise, mortgage rates were sky high. You've probably spoken to people who said, boy, I got a 12.5% mortgage rate back in 78. I thought I was in heaven. And you would think based on this home ownership, my goodness, mortgage rates must be really high. They're not. They're near record lows. And if you take that previous slide and turn it upside down, you get this. This is U.S. private new multifamily construction. That's mostly apartments. That's a reflection of the apartment building boom in this country. We're increasingly a nation of renters. That's the point. And we know it's going to continue with a leading indicator called building permits. Obviously, before you build, you have to get permission from a local authority. These are permissions. Single family is not rising. So we'll roughly build the same number of single-family homes this year as we did last year. That's what this is saying. Again, the yellow shaded area, the gold, that's multifamily. That's where the boom has been. Why is this happening? Why are we more of a renter nation? So many factors. As you know, student debt, obviously one of them. Who's missing at the settlement table? The first-time buyer. The first-time buyer typically represents 40% of purchases, presently around 29%. Student debt, $1.2 trillion outstanding student debt. 16% of it delinquent. And you can't even absolve yourself of that debt even in bankruptcy. They already have a mortgage, even without a home. It's hard to get a mortgage than it used to be. Down payment requirements are stiffer than they used to be for most categories of borrowers. And then there's the role of culture. We economists do not like to talk about culture because it's squishy, but we know that culture affects economic outcomes. And these young people of today, they don't seem to care about asset accumulation the way that we used to. I'm Generation X, part of. One of the movies of my generation was Wall Street. Came out in 1989, starring Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen. Michael Douglas playing the role of corporate Gordon Gekko, and in that movie, Gordon Gekko famously says, "Greed is good." And my generation said, yes, that's right. This is all about asset accumulation. That's the path to happiness. One of the reasons we had the 2000s housing market boom is my generation. We wanted to buy homes. We could not wait to buy homes, but one was not enough. We were the flippers, rehabbers, speculators, builders. Young people today do not seem to care about asset accumulation. They rent their bicycles. The only things they seem to own are those Beats audio headphones, and those are borrowed. And it's not just a decision of whether or not to rent or buy a dwelling unit. Take a deep dive into driver's license data to see the cultural distinctions. Young people today, the 16 and 17-year-olds, are not getting driver's licenses the way that we did when we were 16 or 17. Sir, when you and I turned 16, what's the first thing that we wanted? That's not true, as it turns out you're forgetting. And that's embarrassing for you. But a license was in the top two. And my point as a professional economist is that if you're not getting a license, I know that you're not about to buy a car. Now you watch, over the next 10 years, home ownership comes back in style in a big way in this country with a vengeance. Today's Generation Y, this largest American generation, this most educated American generation, that's why they have so much student debt, they spend a lot of time in school, is between the ages of 16 and 35. So the central tendency of that generation is the mid-20s. Renters. In 10 years, they're between 26 and 45. Such tendency becomes 35 years old, or mid-30s. And all of a sudden, my goodness, renting may not be the best option, because what do they have? What do they do? During those 10 magical years, people have children, get married, often in that order. And all of a sudden, renting may not be their best option. One of the other things you'll hear about young people, and this might not be consistent with some of the themes of today, is you'll hear, and people say this to me all the time, Aniva, because that's my name. These young kids, they love the cities. These millennials, these young kids, they love the cities. Of course, they can't drive. In 10 years, once you have kids, you better know how to drive because there's soccer practice, and sometimes even occasionally school. And then on top of that, home prices are not rising much in the country. So the investment motivation is steadily returning to housing. You can see Miami here, 8.7% year over year. In fact, here I have real estate statistics for many, many metropolitan areas in Florida. And what you see is single family, for instance. So this is year over year percent change in sales is positive everywhere. Tampa's at the bottom here, by the way. So sales are up 22.50%, and the median price of 7.6%. Those are big numbers. That's real recovery. So we're already starting to see some of this take shape, but I think millennials will have even more impact on housing going forward. Non-residential. It remains a surprisingly sloppy recovery. The Architecture Billings Index actually fell in April, below 50, meaning the architects, for whatever reason, in April got less busy. Non-residential construction spending has risen in fits and starts. We just got data yesterday. Not a bad number. Not a bad number. Non-residential construction spending is up about 9% year over year. Not bad. But again, it's been inconsistent. These are the 16 categories that make up non-residential construction in our country. The numbers attached to each horizontal bar represent the percentage change in spending by each of these categories. Number one, and this is not a misprint, manufacturing. 52.9% more construction spending in the manufacturing category than a year ago. That's a huge number. But it doesn't surprise anyone in this room, industrial production in this country has been surging. Amusement and recreation, that includes casinos, for instance, that's up 23.3%. Office, 19.3%, no surprise. Number one sector adding jobs, professional business services. They say in office buildings. Lodging, next. 17.6%, no surprise. Hotel occupancy is up. Construction is up. Commercial, that's retail space, up. Now part of that is not just driven by retail spending, but necessity. The need to get you off of Amazon.com. So if I'm a shopping center owner, I mean, let's face it, you can fulfill almost all of your life's needs, and I mean all of them, and this gentleman knows what I'm talking about, on the computer. You don't have to go anywhere. I see him nodding his head, so he knows, he gets it. So, I do a presentation every year in Philadelphia for the ICSC, and they tell me what they're up to, and they say, we have to spend this money. Better movie theaters, nicer food court, we've got to improve the experience to get these people off their computers. So that's driving this too. What's down on a year-over-year basis? Education is flat. Public safety is down 5.6% on a year-over-year basis. That's a reflection of weak public budget. Religious is down 7.8% on a year-over-year basis. God is off 7.8% on a year-over-year basis. Should come back by next April. Now, so final part, as it relates to construction, materials prices are falling now. This is inputs to construction producer price index. You'll notice the negative bars here, down on a year-over-year basis. Why is this happening? Crude petroleum prices down 50%, natural gas prices down 48%. Somebody out there is benefiting from this. I was talking to some developers in Charlottesville, Virginia last week, and they said, we don't see this, but somebody is benefiting from these lower oil prices. Somebody is benefiting from these lower natural gas prices. It could be the contractors, but somebody in the supply chain benefits from this, even if it's not the developer or purchaser of the construction services. Finally, my forecast. Now, really are hitting the home stretch here. Why would I call the forecast part of my presentation psycho? Because you're a psycho if you think I can forecast. I've been here many years. I think I've proven year after year with consistency. I'm really not that good at that. Now, in my own defense, I will say this. I'm not going for the head fakes. I've never given you a really robust forecast. I've told you things are going to get better. But until the middle class fully participates in this recovery, it's only so rapidly the U.S. economy can expand, and I don't think we get to 3% this year. To the extent that we get close, it's because the consumer will engage in a heavy lift. That's true. But we're not there yet in terms of really having a formidable economic expansion. My forecast for GDP this year around 2.6%. Now, here's retail sales growth by category on a year-over-year basis. So number one category is food services and drinking places. 8.5% year-over-year growth. That's a big number. That's restaurants and bars. That's a fancy way of saying restaurants and bars. By the way, that's one of the reasons that we economists never look up because we ask questions like, do you come to this drinking place often? But that's restaurants and bars. Third category is internet retailers, no surprise. Fourth is health and personal care. In fact, you can see the American lifestyle right out here. So we wake up, we go to a bar and start drinking, get online and start texting and tweeting, and then get into our car while we're drinking, texting and tweeting, and eventually end up in a healthcare store. So that's the American lifestyle. Something to be proud of. Does drive a $17 trillion economy. The index of leading economic indicators remains positive for the most part, telling us that yes, it's not going to be a 3% year, I don't think, but it's going to be a year of growth. And could end up being the best year of growth so far during the cycle. The best year has been 2010, 2.5%. I think this year could be a little bit better than that. So where are we headed? Telltale Heart is a short story written by Edgar Allan Poe, first published in 1843. The economy gained momentum over the course of last year. We've seen that in previous years. Momentum and then loss of momentum. I think you'll see over the next 6 months really good data from the economy. Surprisingly good. To date, the consumer has really not been spending that rapidly. The last 4 or 5 months, year-over-year numbers don't look that bad, but the last 4 or 5 months have not been that good. And one of the things that we thought was consumer spending would pick up because they're saving so much on cheaper gasoline prices. But instead, they've chosen to save for now those gasoline price savings. I think that's going to change. Over the summer months, back-to-school sales and so on and so forth will be quite strong. In fact, maybe the tailwind still in the economy related to the consumer. Strong stock market, lower gasoline prices, low interest rates. I think this year we have greater certainty regarding Federal Reserve policy. You say, Anima, that's nuts to say such a thing. Everyone's wondering, when will Janet Yellen start increasing interest rates? How is that certainty? I didn't say certainty. That's a greater certainty. Remember last year what we were facing? End of QE3. And no one knew what that meant. And then almost all of us think that interest rates will go up last year. They did not. And they did not. Why? Because even as QE3 was ending in October of last year, finally ended, interest rates in Germany, balance of Europe, and in Japan were falling, and U.S. interest rates actually fell. So very few people looked at, analyzed things from that perspective. Everyone was looking at Federal Reserve policy, but not global bond markets. But that was really what drove that outcome. Now today the 10-year is up to 2.26%, interesting, but it's still quite low. And from last year's perspective, interest rates were quite much lower than we thought they would be. So I say greater certainty, because Janet Yellen was telling you when she's going to raise interest rates. What is she hiding from you so far? She said to you QE3 would end in October of 2014. When did it end? October of 2014. And now she's telling you, I'm not going to increase interest rates right now. How is she saying that? I'm data dependent. And the data have not been that good the last few months. So she's saying, not now. Maybe September. I think it's September because I think you'll be surprised by how good the data are for the U.S. economy between now and September. We'll see. The world is not perfect. So it's a relatively upbeat forecast for the U.S. macroeconomy. My look for Tampa is much better, by the way, than it is for the balance of the country. Why? Because you have a buzz now. People want to be here. Where else are you going to live? Birmingham? I mean, you have to ask yourself, what does Tampa have that other communities doesn't have? Water, beach, so on and so forth. Florida's tax environment. But the rest of the country, it's pretty upbeat forecasting for the rest of the country. But of course, with those so-called black swan threats that I always mention, have to mention. Iran, Israel/Iran, Europe, meaning another financial crisis contagion, cybersecurity, electromagnetic pulse. You might ask the question, Ivan, where's ISIS? Where's ISIS on your list? I would say, of course, like a smart aleck, Iraq and Syria. But it's not on the list. Why? Because that's not a black swan threat. A black swan threat is a low probability threat. ISIS is happening right now. It's not low probability. It's 100%. A lot of bad things happen in the world. Vladimir Putin is right naked through the Ukraine as we speak. I mean, those people can't open their eyes. This on top of that. And you can have positive black swan threats too, by the way. I'll give you an example. Seahawks are on second down. From the perspective of New England Patriots, that's a positive black swan. That no one saw that coming. But here I'm focusing on negative, and we all have to mention. Stock market has been nervous. And started getting nervous starting in the summer of last year. Why? Well, prices were falling. That seems odd. Isn't that good for corporate earnings? For, not ExxonMobil, of course, or Halliburton, but other corporate earnings? It is. But the equity market investor was looking at the oil market investor and asked the question, do you foresee a weaker economy than we do globally? Because if that's what you're putting down for us to pick up, that's the message. That's back in corporate earnings and stock prices. So people's theories of action start to really diverge. Starting last summer, you get more volatility as a result of that. Some people say, look at that and say, oil price is bad. Some people look and say, oil prices falling is good. Thoughts. But more people benefit from lower oil prices than are hurt. Despite all the progress we made as a country in terms of increasing oil output, we're still a net importer of oil. More contracts from developers are helped than hurt. Frankly, low oil prices just don't make me that nervous. But something else does. What is that? The strong U.S. dollar. Now it's great when we're visiting Toronto or Vancouver or Paris or Tokyo or Kyoto. To have a strong U.S. dollar, you can buy a lot of stuff. But in terms of net exports, I think this is the reason that we will not get to 3% growth this year. I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you again today. Thank you.